The stars in the night sky twinkled as a fleet of small alien ships silently moved across the vast emptiness of space. They were from the planet Arca, far away in a distant galaxy. The Arcans were a race of tiny humanoid beings, only a foot tall. Their bodies were delicate, with smooth, shimmering skin and large eyes that glowed in the dark. For thousands of years, they had conquered and colonized many planets, thanks to their advanced technology and brilliant minds. But now, they had set their sights on Earth. In the heart of their fleet, Commander Elia sat in a sleek, silver ship. She was the leader of this mission. Elia was a master strategist, known for her quick thinking and confident leadership. She had studied Earth for years, watching its people, learning their ways, and after many calculations, she had decided that Earth was right for the taking. The humans, she thought, were weak. They were big and slow, with no advanced technology like the Arcans. Their cities were full of tall buildings, but they were all easily breakable, and their defenses were laughable. It would be easy to take over Earth. The Arcans had powerful weapons, microscopic bombs, and nanotechnology capable of destroying anything in their path. To them, Earth's towering creatures seemed like little more than insects. They would swarm in, conquer, and then rule the planet as they had done on so many others. As Elia looked out from the window of her ship, she saw the blue and green ball that was Earth. It was beautiful, and she had to admit, there was something about it that intrigued her. But she quickly shook off any doubts. There was no reason to hesitate. The Arcans were superior, and they would not fail. Below her, on Earth's surface, a quiet farming village sat nestled in the valley of a distant country. The villagers lived simple lives, growing crops, raising animals, and working hard each day. Among them was a man named David Monroe, a farmer who lived alone in a small wooden house. David was a quiet, easygoing man who spent his days tending to his crops and animals. He had never been far from home, and he liked it that way. Life was peaceful, and he was content. But all that was about to change. Elia's fleet descended from the sky, invisible to the naked eye. Their ships were small, only a few inches long, and capable of hiding in plain sight. They had technology so advanced that they could become nearly invisible, making it almost impossible for any Earthling to detect their presence. Slowly, they floated toward the village. The Arcans had planned everything carefully. They would land silently in the fields at night, near the farmhouses. From there, they would begin their invasion, using their nanoweapons to disable any human resistance. The villagers would never know what hit them. They would be in control in no time. But there was one thing they had not anticipated. David Monroe had just finished his work in the field for the day and was returning home. He was tired, but there was a peacefulness in the evening air that made him feel calm. As he walked toward his house, he looked up at the sky, thinking about how nice it was to be home. It was just another ordinary evening for him, nothing unusual. The Arcans, however, were anything but ordinary. Their tiny ships hovered just above the ground, darting across the field at incredible speed. They had no idea that David was about to change everything. As David reached his house, he stopped and looked around. Something felt strange. There was a soft buzzing sound in the air, almost like a swarm of insects. He turned his head, scanning the field behind him. But there was nothing to see. Shrugging it off as just the wind, David continued toward his door. However, as he opened it and stepped inside, he unknowingly knocked over an invisible Arcan ship that had been hovering just above the porch. The small ship tumbled to the ground with a soft, metallic clang. Inside, the Arcans were thrown into disarray. Commander Elia, who had been overseeing the operation from her command seat, was suddenly jolted forward. Her tiny ship rocked violently, and alarms blared throughout the control room. For a moment, she could not understand what had happened. It was only when she saw the massive figure of David standing at the doorway, oblivious to the chaos he had caused, that the reality of the situation hit her. David Monroe, to the Arcans, looked like a giant. He was a mere human, but to them, he towered over everything. His hand, which had accidentally brushed against their ship, was the size of an entire Arkan city block. His face was as large as a mountain, and his voice, when he spoke, was like thunder in the small ship's sensors. The Arkans had never seen anything like it. Inside their ship, Elia's mind raced. This was not part of the plan. They were supposed to be the invaders, the ones in control. But now, they were nothing more than tiny specks of dust in the presence of a being that could squash them with a single move. What is this? Elia whispered to herself, her heart pounding in her chest. This is no ordinary world. The invasion had just begun, but it was already clear that it was not going to be as easy as they had thought. They had vastly underestimated the power of the Earthlings, and now they had to figure out what to do next. David Monroe stood in his small farmhouse, unaware of the chaos that had unfolded just outside his door. He had been so tired after a long day's work that he didn't even hear the buzzing of the alien ships as they hovered near him. As he settled into his chair by the fire, the Arkans inside their ship were scrambling, trying to understand what had happened. Elia, the commander of the tiny alien fleet, had never felt more helpless in her life. The shock of the collision had rattled her to her core. She had expected to encounter resistance from the humans, but nothing like this. The Earthling, this giant man, had knocked their entire ship off course with a simple movement. "Report," Elia snapped, regaining her composure as her officers scrambled to assess the damage. The ship's control panel flickered, and several systems were down. The crew of tiny Arkans was shaken, but they quickly got to work. It seemed that their technology had held up under the unexpected shock, but they were still stranded on this giant planet. "Commander, the ship's primary functions are damaged," one of the crew members reported nervously. "We are unable to take off without repairs." Elia gritted her teeth, trying to stay calm. "Can we communicate with the humans?" she asked. "We've tried, Commander, but our communication device is malfunctioning. It seems the Earthling has caused more damage than we first thought." "Great," Elia muttered under her breath. "Just great." Outside, David was still sitting in his chair by the fire, flipping through a book. His day had been long, but it was peaceful. He thought nothing of the mysterious buzzing sound he'd heard earlier. To him, it was probably just a drone or an insect, something harmless. What he didn't know was that his simple, everyday life was now entwined with the fate of an entire alien race. Back outside, the Arkans knew they had to act quickly. The Earthling's massive form loomed large in the distance, but they couldn't just let their ship remain on the ground. If they didn't get their technology working again soon, their entire mission could fail. "All right," Elia said, trying to remain steady. "We need to leave this ship before it's discovered. There are other options. We still have a few other ships in orbit." But leaving their ship was no easy task. The Arkans were tiny, so small that the grass and plants surrounding them looked like towering trees. Even the simplest movements of a human could send them flying. And if they didn't find a way to communicate with David or leave without being noticed, they would have no chance of completing their mission. One of the other Arkans, a young officer named Rico, looked out from the small window of their ship. The human, David, was still in his house. He appeared calm, unaware of the trouble outside. But Rico was nervous. "Commander, what if he sees us?" she asked. "What if he's not as harmless as we think?" Elia frowned. She had considered that possibility. What if the Earthling wasn't the peaceful farmer he appeared to be? What if he saw their tiny ships and attacked? They had no way of knowing what he would do. But Elia had always trusted her instincts, and right now, she had to make a decision. "No," she said firmly. "We will approach him carefully. We can't afford to make any mistakes." The Arkans gathered their things and prepared to leave the damaged ship. As they did, they carefully crawled out of their tiny escape hatches and into the open field. The grass swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the sky above was turning dark. To the Arkans, it felt as though they were entering another world. David had just finished reading his book when he heard a faint noise coming from outside. He stood up and stretched, thinking maybe it was just the wind. He glanced out the window, but he saw nothing unusual. Shrugging, he went back to his book. What David didn't realize was that the Arkans were now only a few feet away from his house, their tiny figures darting through the grass. They moved carefully, making sure not to get too close to the human who might spot them. Elia, at the front of the small group, led them cautiously. She had a plan, but it would depend on one thing: getting David's attention. If she could speak to him, she could explain the situation, and maybe, just maybe, avoid a confrontation. The Arkans paused just behind a bush, peering through the leaves at David's house. It was strange, seeing the human up close. They had expected him to be a giant, yes, but seeing him with their own eyes made the size difference even more shocking. He was enormous. They couldn't even imagine how one of them would survive in such a world. At that moment, David stepped outside, and for the first time, he saw the tiny figures moving in the grass. His eyes widened. He thought he was seeing things. He rubbed his eyes and squinted. There, among the blades of grass, were small, humanoid creatures. They looked, well, strange. He froze for a moment, unsure if he should approach or stay where he was. The creatures didn't look threatening, but he wasn't sure what to make of them. It was then that he heard a faint voice coming from the tiny creatures. "Excuse me," came a voice that sounded almost like a whisper in the wind. David's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he was imagining things. "Hello," David called cautiously, his voice loud enough to carry, but not enough to be threatening. The tiny figures stopped moving and seemed to look up at him. David bent down closer to get a better view. What he saw almost made him laugh. They were so small, but there was no time to laugh. The Arkans had arrived, and they were here for a reason. David knelt down, leaning over to get a better look at the tiny figures in the grass. They weren't like anything he had ever seen before. They were small, maybe a foot tall at most, with glowing eyes and smooth, shimmering skin. At first, he thought they might be some kind of strange insect or bug. But as he looked closer, he saw that they were clearly humanoid. One of them, a figure with a bright red suit, stepped forward. She was holding something that looked like a tiny device, which she pointed at him. David didn't know whether he should be scared, amused, or confused. Was this some sort of prank? Before he could decide what to do, the small figure spoke. Her voice was soft, but there was an authority in it. "Greetings, giant," she said in perfect English, though her voice sounded almost like a whisper carried on the wind. "We are from the planet Arca. We come in peace." David blinked, feeling his heart race. Peace," he repeated, a little unsure of how to respond. "You're really tiny." The tiny alien blinked up at him, clearly aware of the size difference. "Yes, we are," she said, her voice steady. "But we are also powerful. Our technology is far beyond what you have here on Earth." David's eyes widened. Technology. He looked around, trying to figure out how something so small could have such advanced technology. "Wait, are you saying you came here to, what, conquer Earth or something?" The tiny alien hesitated. "We were planning to conquer Earth," she admitted, her tone apologetic. "But that was before we realized that you are far stronger than we imagined." David chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Stronger than you imagined? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a farmer. You guys are so small, you're barely the size of my hand." The alien seemed to take a moment to process that. "We did not anticipate your size," she admitted, looking up at him. "We thought we could easily take control of your planet. But you are like a titan to us." David stood up slowly, his mind still trying to make sense of everything. These tiny creatures, who clearly had advanced technology, had come to Earth to conquer it, only to find out that they were powerless against his size. He couldn't help but feel a bit amused. But there was also something else in his chest, a sense of curiosity and wonder about these creatures. "So," David said, scratching his head, "what happens now? Are you going to try to conquer us again, or are we going to talk?" The alien, who seemed to be the leader, looked at him seriously. "We had no intention of attacking you once we saw your true size. But we are stranded now. Our ship is damaged, and we have no way to return home unless we get help." David's brow furrowed. "So, you want my help, but you were going to invade Earth?" The alien's eyes softened. "Yes, we made a mistake. We were too quick to judge your planet and its inhabitants. Now, we seek your help to repair our ship. In exchange, we offer you our knowledge. Our technology can help your people. You will be able to advance much faster with our assistance." David felt a strange mix of disbelief and intrigue. He had never imagined that a tiny alien race would come to Earth, let alone ask for his help after trying to invade it. Still, he wasn't entirely sure he could trust them. "Why would I help you?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "You came here to conquer us." The alien leader sighed, her shoulders slumping a little. "I understand your hesitation. We were wrong. But we can make things right. We offer you knowledge, technology, and peace. The choice is yours." David stared down at the tiny creatures for a long moment, weighing their words. He wasn't a scientist or a leader, but he understood what they were offering. Advanced technology could change the course of human history. It could help people live better, safer lives. But could he trust these tiny beings who had come so close to invading Earth? Finally, David nodded. "All right," he said slowly. "I'll help you. But we'll need to take it slow. I don't know what you've got in mind, but we need to figure out how to fix that ship first." The alien leader's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "You will not regret this, Earthling." David gave a small smile, though he was still uncertain. He didn't know what kind of trouble he might be getting into, but he had made his decision. He would help them, but only if they proved they could be trusted. The tiny aliens seemed to sense his hesitation and gave him a respectful nod. They knew they had to gain his trust, and they were willing to do whatever it took. For now, David turned toward the damaged ship, trying to figure out how to approach it. The Archons, despite their advanced technology, were too small to do anything on their own. David, however, was large and strong enough to help. "All right," David said to himself. "Let's see what we can do." The tiny alien leader, who had introduced herself as Elia, walked beside him, her eyes scanning the ship. She had once been a conqueror, but now she was asking for help. It was a strange reversal of roles. She couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. If they succeeded, the Archons would owe their survival to this human, a giant, kind-hearted Earthling who had saved them. But as the Archons and David worked together to repair their ship, they all knew one thing: this was just the beginning. And whatever happened next, Earth and the Archons would never be the same. David looked at the strange little ship in front of him. It was still smaller than his boot, but its sleek, shiny surface was now visible up close. He had helped move it out of the grass earlier, and now he was examining the damage. The Archons had explained that their ship's main system was damaged by the accidental bump, and he had agreed to help them repair it. But David couldn't help but wonder, how did they expect him to fix something so small? As he crouched down near the tiny ship, David felt a little like a giant in a world of toys. The Archons were working around him, using tiny tools that seemed to glow in the dark. They moved quickly, their small hands steady as they tinkered with the inner workings of the ship. Elia, the alien leader, was at the forefront of the operation. She had been calm and collected since the beginning, guiding her team with confidence. David admired her focus. "How can I help?" David asked, unsure of what exactly they needed from him. Elia looked up at him, her large eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and seriousness. "We need to reprogram the core systems of the ship. We're too small to operate the controls effectively. so we'll need you to handle the larger equipment. David nodded and carefully reached for the small console that Elia had pointed to. He had worked with machinery before on his farm, but this was different. He was handling alien technology. Still, the task seemed simple enough. Press the right buttons, follow their instructions, and keep the ship from falling apart. All right, here goes nothing, David muttered to himself as he activated the ship's main console. For the first time since the Archons had arrived, the tiny creatures began to relax. They knew that their success here depended on whether David could help them. It wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was a matter of trust. If they could get their ship working again, they could return home. But if they failed, they would have no choice but to stay on Earth, with nowhere to go. As David worked, Elia walked alongside him, observing his progress. She couldn't help but notice how different the Earthling was from her initial expectations. She had thought humans were primitive, weak creatures. But David was proving her wrong at every turn. He was strong, intelligent, and kind. And now, as he worked to fix their ship, she saw a new side of him, a side that was patient, thoughtful, and willing to help even those who had once been his enemies. "Is it working?" one of the Archons asked, their voice filled with hope. David pressed another button, and the ship's control panel hummed to life. "It seems to be. We're getting power back, little by little." The Archons cheered quietly, their tiny voices sounding like distant chimes in the air. Elia smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time since they had arrived, things were looking up. But just as they were about to celebrate, the ship suddenly flickered. The console screen blinked, and a series of warning lights flashed red. "Oh," David said, his smile fading. "What just happened?" Elia quickly moved forward, inspecting the console. "The system is still unstable. It's responding to our changes, but not as expected. There seems to be a flaw in the programming." David scratched his head. "What does that mean?" "I thought we were making progress." "It means," Elia said, "that we need to run an experiment to find out what's causing the problem. We have to test the ship's core systems, but it will require precision." "An experiment?" David asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you sure you want to test it with everything still so unstable?" Elia's expression grew serious. "We don't have a choice. If we don't test it now, we may never get another chance." David sighed, feeling the weight of the decision. He had already agreed to help, but this was starting to feel like more than just a simple repair job. Still, he trusted Elia. He could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't giving up, and neither would he. "All right," David said, stepping back. "What do we need to do?" Elia motioned for one of her team members to bring a small device forward. It looked like a tiny glowing cube, no larger than a marble. "This is a sensor. We need to install it in the core system to test the energy flow. If the sensor detects any abnormal activity, we'll know exactly where the issue lies." David nodded, taking the sensor carefully. He felt strange, holding something so small and delicate in his large hands. "So I just placed this inside the ship's core." Elia nodded. "Yes, but be careful. The ship's core is very sensitive. If we damage it further, we may not be able to fix it." David took a deep breath and carefully inserted the tiny sensor into the core system. The moment it clicked into place, the ship hummed again, this time louder than before. The console screen flickered once more, but then it steadied. For a long moment, nothing happened. David and Elia both stared at the screen, waiting. Then, a message appeared on the display. The words were in a language David didn't understand, but Elia immediately recognized them. "It's working," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "The sensor is sending us the data we need. We've found the issue." David let out a sigh of relief. He had no idea how all of this alien technology worked, but he was glad he could be of help. The Archons seemed pleased with his progress, and Elia gave him a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said softly. You have no idea how much this means to us. David smiled back. It's the least I could do. Let's just hope we can get this thing fully up and running. As they continued to work, the ship seemed to come alive. The flashing red lights turned green, and the humming sound became steady. It was still far from fully repaired, but they were on the right path. Elia and her team worked quickly, making adjustments and refining the ship's systems. David, though not an expert in alien technology, continued to lend his hands to the effort, doing everything he could to help. For the first time since their arrival, the Archons felt hope. They had come to Earth as conquerors, but now they were beginning to realize that they might leave as something else, allies. The humans had shown them kindness, something they had never expected from a planet so large, so powerful, and so full of unknown dangers. And for Elia, that meant more than anything. Days had passed since David and the Archons first met. The tiny alien group had quickly become part of his daily routine, working together in the fields near his farmhouse to repair their ship. With every passing day, the ship came closer to being fully functional. But as the Archons grew more hopeful, David's mind was filled with questions. What was going to happen when the ship was fully repaired? Would the Archons leave? Would they return to their planet and forget all about Earth? Or would they stay, perhaps forming some kind of alliance with humans? The possibilities were endless, and David couldn't shake the feeling that the fate of Earth and the Archons was in his hands. As the sun began to set on another peaceful evening, David sat on his porch, looking out at the quiet farmland stretching before him. He had just finished a long day of work on the ship, and now he was taking a moment to himself. He heard the sound of tiny footsteps behind him, and turned to see Elia walking toward him, her small figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. "You're working late," David said with a small smile. "What's on your mind?" Elia paused for a moment, then stepped forward, her eyes focused on him. "We're close," she said. "The ship is almost repaired. We should be able to leave soon." David frowned, his brow furrowing. "And what happens after that?" "You're just going to leave without saying goodbye." Elia hesitated. "We have to return to our planet. It is our duty. Our people need us." David nodded slowly. He understood. The Archons had come here with their own mission in mind, and it was clear that they couldn't stay on Earth forever. But something in his heart told him that this wasn't the end. Not yet. "I understand," David said quietly, "but I've learned a lot from you and your people, and I've seen how much you've changed since you first arrived." Elia lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "We came here to conquer you. I never thought I would learn so much from you. You showed us kindness when we deserved none." David felt a pang in his chest. He had known from the start that this wasn't a simple repair job. It was much more than that. In helping the Archons, he had become part of their story, and they had become part of his. The relationship between Earth and the Archons was no longer one of conqueror and conquered. It was one of allies, working side by side for a common goal. "It's not too late to change your minds," David said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You don't have to leave. We can figure something out. We can work together. The future could be different for both of us." Elia looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. She had always been a commander, focused on the mission and the people she was responsible for. But in David, she saw something she hadn't expected: hope. Hope that humans and Archons could live together in peace if given the chance. "We never imagined that Earth could offer us so much," Iliad admitted. "We thought you were weak, but you've proven us wrong. Maybe we can stay, at least for a while longer." David smiled, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. "We'll figure it out," he said. "We have time. But for now, let's focus on getting your ship working again." The next few days were filled with activity. David and the Archons worked together on the ship, making final adjustments to the engine and systems. As the ship's core hummed to life, David felt a sense of pride. They had come so far from an accidental collision to a working partnership. But even as they fixed the ship, there were moments when David couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when the ship was fully repaired? Would the Archons stay? Would they choose to help humanity, or would they leave, returning to their own planet to continue their mission? One evening, after another long day of repairs, Alia sat beside David on the porch. The stars above sparkled brightly, and the cool evening breeze ruffled their hair. The two of them sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. Finally, Alia spoke. "David, I need to ask you something." David turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "What is it?" "If we stay on Earth," she said, "we will be taking a huge risk. We may never be able to return to our planet. Our people may not understand why we stayed, but we feel different now. We have seen what it's like to be on the other side. We don't want to conquer you anymore. We want to help." David's heart swelled with emotion. He had known that this was coming, but hearing it from Alia made it feel real. She and her people had changed. They had learned, adapted, and now they were offering humanity a chance to grow alongside them. "I believe you," David said. "I think we can do great things together. But it's not just up to me. It's up to the rest of the world. We'll have to convince them that you and your people are not a threat." Alia nodded solemnly. "We understand. We will do everything we can to prove our intentions." The two of them sat together, watching the stars and thinking about the future. It was uncertain, but for the first time, it seemed full of possibility. David and the Archons were no longer just strangers. They were allies. And in that moment, it felt like anything was possible. The repair of the ship had not only brought the Archons closer to their goal, but it had also brought David closer to understanding his role in something much bigger than himself. The future of Earth and the Archons was still unclear, but one thing was certain. They were no longer enemies. They were partners, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The day had finally arrived. After weeks of hard work, the Archon ship was almost ready to take off. David had spent countless hours working alongside them, helping where he could and learning more about their advanced technology. Now, it was time to see if their efforts would pay off. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the land, David stood in front of the ship, looking at the sleek, small vessel that had brought these tiny beings to Earth. The Archons had made great progress, and it was clear that the ship was now functioning much better than before. The hum of the engines had returned, and the blinking lights that once flickered in confusion now glowed steadily in a perfect rhythm. Alia, the leader of the Archons, stood beside him, her eyes scanning the ship's systems. She had always been focused, but now, there was a hint of nervousness in her demeanor. David noticed, but he didn't say anything. He knew that the Archons had come a long way, both technologically and emotionally. "This is it," Alia said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're ready." David nodded, still feeling a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "You've done it. You've really done it." Alia smiled, though it was a little strained. "We could not have done it without your help, David. You showed us what it means to work together, to trust each other." David gave a small laugh. "I didn't think I'd end up helping aliens fix their spaceship when I woke up one morning." The two of them shared a moment of quiet understanding. Their journey had started with a crash and a conflict, but now it had evolved into something much more meaningful. The Archons had come to Earth as conquerors, but they were leaving as allies, partners who had learned that trust and cooperation were far more valuable than domination. "We're not leaving just yet," Alia added, her voice a little quieter now. "Before we go, we have something important to discuss with you." David turned to her, curious. "What is it?" Alia took a deep breath. "We've been thinking about what you said, about staying and working together. We've decided we want to stay, for a while longer, at least." David's heart skipped a beat. He had expected the Archons to leave soon after their ship was repaired, But hearing Ilya's words filled him with a new sense of hope. "You mean it? You're staying?" Ilya nodded. "We've learned so much here. We don't want to just leave and forget about Earth. We want to help. We want to see how much we can accomplish together. But we understand that this will take time. We need to prove to your people that we can be trusted." David's smile grew wider. "I think we can make it work. I'll help you with that. We'll talk to the world leaders. Let them know that the Archons want peace." Helia's expression softened, and she placed a small hand on David's arm. "Thank you, David. You've shown us what it means to be brave, to stand up for what is right." David shrugged modestly. "I just did what anyone would do, but I'm glad to help." As the days passed, David and Ilya worked together to plan their next steps. They needed to prepare for the possibility of convincing the rest of the world that the Archons were not a threat. David knew that it wouldn't be easy. There would be skeptics, people who were afraid of what the Archons might do. But David believed in them, and he believed in the potential for a peaceful future. The Archons continued to repair their ship, and David continued to lend his knowledge of Earth to help them understand the planet better. They spent hours talking about Earth's history, its cultures, its challenges. The Archons were fascinated by the diversity of life on the planet. They had never imagined that a world so vast and complex could exist. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, there was a sudden change in the atmosphere. The sky, which had been clear for days, now darkened unexpectedly. A storm was coming. David frowned and glanced at Ilya, who was also staring up at the sky. "This doesn't look good," David said, his voice filled with concern. "We need to get inside before the storm hits." Ilya's eyes widened. "We cannot leave the ship unprotected. The energy fluctuations could damage it further." David looked at the ship, and then back at the sky. "We'll have to move fast. If we can't protect it, the storm could undo everything we've worked for." The two of them hurried toward the ship, calling out to the other Archons to help secure it. The tiny aliens quickly moved into action, using their advanced tools to reinforce the ship's outer shell. David did what he could to help, lifting heavy materials and ensuring the ship was covered. As the storm approached, the wind picked up and the first drops of rain began to fall. The sky rumbled with thunder, and the sound of the storm grew louder. But despite the chaos around them, David and the Archons worked together in perfect harmony. Finally, after what felt like hours of frantic effort, the ship was secured. David stood back, breathing heavily, and looked up at the sky. The storm was now in full force, but the ship stood firm. "Good job, everyone," David said, a sense of pride in his voice. "We did it." Ilya looked up at the ship with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "We may have made it through the storm, but we still have much work to do. We must prove to your world that we are here to help." David nodded. "And we will. Together, we'll make it happen." For the first time since the Archons' arrival, David truly felt that they were on the right path. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer just strangers. They were partners. And together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm that felt like the eye of a new beginning. The wind had died down, and the rain had stopped, leaving the land wet but peaceful. David stood at the edge of his farm, gazing at the Archon ship. The ship was now fully repaired and secured, and its glowing lights pulsed with a steady rhythm. Ilya stood beside him, her small figure framed by the rising sun. The Archons had worked tirelessly, and now they were ready for the next step. But David could sense that she was still uncertain about what lay ahead. "We've made it this far," David said, his voice steady. "The world is going to have questions, but we'll face them together. You and your people aren't alone in this." Ilya turned to him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and uncertainty. "We've come so far, but it's still hard to believe that Earth will accept us. We were conquerors once. Can we really change?" David smiled, his expression reassuring. Change isn't easy, but it's possible. And if anyone can show the world that peace is possible, it's you and your people." Aelia nodded, though the weight of the decision still hung heavy in her heart. The Archons had been taught to conquer, to dominate, and now they had to show a completely different side of themselves to the world. They needed to prove that they could be trusted, that they could work alongside humans as equals, not as invaders. The plan was simple. David would help them contact world leaders. They would explain everything: the crash, the repairs, their decision to stay on Earth to help. David had no idea how the world would react, but he believed that the Archons' actions spoke louder than any words ever could. As they made their way to the nearby town to prepare for the first official meeting with the world leaders, David felt a surge of both nervousness and excitement. The Archons had learned to trust him, and he had learned to trust them. Now, it was time to take that trust and show it to the world. The journey to the town was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. The Archons were small and delicate, and they had no idea what the world would think of their decision to stay. They had never faced the scrutiny of an entire planet before, and the weight of that uncertainty rested heavily on their shoulders. "We're ready," Aelia said as they reached the town's outskirts. Her voice was calm, but David could tell she was feeling the pressure. David turned to her. "We're ready. You've shown the world who you are. Now, it's time to let them see the real you." Together, they entered the town, where they were met with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. News had spread about the arrival of the Archons, and the world was watching closely. Reporters lined the streets, cameras flashing, as world leaders gathered in a large meeting hall. David and Aelia made their way to the front, where representatives from different countries waited. The room fell silent as Aelia and the Archons entered. David stood by her side, ready to translate and support her. Aelia took a deep breath, looking around the room at the leaders who would determine the future of the Archons on Earth. "We are not here to conquer," Aelia began, her voice strong and clear. "We came to your planet by accident, and we did what we had to do to survive. But since then, we have learned from you. We have seen what it means to trust, to work together, and to change." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. The room was still, and all eyes were on her. "We do not wish to take over your planet," she continued. "We want to help. We want to learn from you, to share what we know, and to build a future together. We understand that we must prove ourselves, and we are willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then, a world leader stood and addressed the Archons. "We have heard many stories of alien invasions," the leader said, "but your actions speak louder than any story. You have shown that you are willing to work with us, not against us. Perhaps we have underestimated you." David watched as the leaders discussed among themselves. It was clear that the Archons had made an impression. Their willingness to change, to offer help, had caught the attention of the world. The first step had been taken, and now, it was up to the people of Earth to decide what came next. In the following days, the world's leaders met in private, discussing how to move forward. David and Aelia worked tirelessly, speaking with scientists, government officials, and members of the public. The Archons offered their knowledge of technology, medicine, and the universe, eager to show that they could be a valuable ally to humanity. It wasn't easy. There were still many who were skeptical, who feared the unknown. But slowly, as the Archons demonstrated their peaceful intentions, the tide began to turn. People started to see them as they truly were, an advanced, intelligent species who wanted to share, not take. One evening, as David and Aelia sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Aelia turned to him. "We did it," she said quietly. "The world is starting to understand. We are no longer conquerors. We are allies." David smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "We're just getting started. But this is a good beginning." Aelia nodded, her eyes reflecting the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. "Thank you, David. You believed in us when no one else did." David reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We believed in each other. That's what matters. And as the night fell over the peaceful world, David knew that their journey was far from over. But with the Arkans by his side, and the world beginning to see the possibilities of a future together, he felt a sense of hope like never before. The future was theirs to build, together.